Eggs and Issues, a monthly business forum bringing timely economic discussion to the region for 35 years. Presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. Presenting sponsors, Bank of America and Martins Point Healthcare. Cooperating sponsors, First Light, WEX, and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. Community Corner sponsor, Goral Palmer. Reception sponsors, Clark Insurance, KeyBank, and Verrill. Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs sponsors, Springborn Staffing Center and AAA Northern New England. Media partners, News Radio WGAN, The Forecaster, WMTW News 8, Maine Biz, with production support provided by Headlight. Special community partners, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, the University of Southern Maine, and Southern Maine Community College. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber President, Jim Cohen.
Eggs and Issues, the monthly and currently virtual business breakfast of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. My name is Jim Cohen, and I'm coming to you live once again from my living room studio here in North Deering in Portland, Maine. I'm a partner with the Verrill law firm, and I'm honored once again to serve as the volunteer president of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce Board. I want to thank you all again for joining us safely this month for Eggs and Issues. Today's program features a discussion with two key leaders of the Maine legislature who will talk about priorities for 2021. But before we turn to the program, I want to take a moment to say goodbye to 2020 and a hello to 2021. This has been a challenging year for Maine and our nation on many levels, and our hearts go out to the thousands of Mainers and Americans and millions of Americans who have been affected or had lives lost due to the COVID-19 pandemic. America has also been divided on many issues and needs to heal and come together. I'm proud of the efforts of our local chamber as we have helped lead campaigns like Let's Be Kind, the Racial Equity Challenge, and Pay It Forward to help bring our community together and encourage Mainers to think about each other, behave in ways that improve our lives and the collective health and prosperity of our region, and heal long-standing social and racial divisions. I'm so proud of our staff, our boards, our members, our communities, as we work to face these challenges together. I also want to now turn, of course, and to thank all of our sponsors who make this event possible, whether in person or virtual. First and foremost, our presenting sponsors, Bank of America and Martins Point Healthcare. I also want to thank our other generous sponsors, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, First Light, Clark Insurance, KeyBank, Verrill, Goral Palmer, AAA Northern New England, and Springborn Staffing. A special thank you to our media partners, The Forecaster, WGAN, WMTW Maine CW, and Maine Biz. And a thank you to our FMI sponsor, the Portland Public Library. We continue to miss our friends at Headlight, Audiovisual, and Holiday Inn by the Bay, and we hope to be back in person soon and working with them once again. Finally, a very special thank you to our special community partners who support all of our chamber initiatives. Anthem, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, University of Southern Maine, Southern Maine Community College, and MEMIC. Let's have a virtual round of applause for all of our generous sponsors. Now, I want to take a moment to update our members and our audience about Portland's Emergency Wage Voter Initiative, which was the topic of our last Eggs and Issues. The Chamber and most City Council members opposed this ordinance, not because of the $15 an hour minimum wage to be phased in over multiple years, but rather because it was poorly drafted, it created unique labor laws for one municipality in the state of Maine, and impacted and created a dramatic wage increase for many small businesses and not-for-profits who are already struggling to stay afloat during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of those nonprofits provide critical public services, whether it's childcare, other social service assistance, or substance use disorder treatment. Those entities are on fixed incomes, essentially, and are having a very difficult time moving forward to continue to provide all of those services. In the week since our presentation last month, the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce has joined with half a dozen other local businesses in challenging the legal underpinnings of the ordinance. And many local businesses have sadly announced that they've been forced to take steps to manage the ordinance, such as imposing surcharges, laying off workers, increasing work from home, or even closing down their Portland locations. These are obviously challenging times, and this is a challenging issue. But please know that the Chamber and its amazing staff continue to work extremely hard on this and other key issues for our members and the community at large. A sincere thank you to Quincy Hensel and the entire Chamber team for working so hard on everyone's behalf. Now on to today's topic, a view from Augusta, the 2021 legislative priorities. During today's upcoming presentation, you will hear from two key leaders of the Maine legislature, Maine House Speaker Ryan Fecteau, a Democrat from Biddeford and also the youngest speaker of the House throughout the nation, and Kathleen Dillingham, House Republican leader from Oxford, Maine. As a lawyer and lobbyist myself, my colleagues in Augusta have had the pleasure of working with both Speaker Fecteau and Leader Dillingham, as well as their staff, on a wide range of issues. And I know firsthand how hard they work for the good of Maine people, as well as how open they are from hearing from Maine people and residents and businesses from around the state on the many issues that affect all of us. In the best of circumstances, the job of legislating in Augusta is not an easy one. And this year is shaping up to be even more difficult. With Maine now 10 months into the COVID-19 pandemic, as cases surge statewide, even with new vaccines slowly coming onto the scene, the usual practice of in-person meetings in State House chambers, committee rooms, or even in the hallways is simply not an option. Instead, for the foreseeable future, virtual meetings and socially distanced and infrequent sessions at the Augusta Civic Center appear to be the norm. Likewise, as the pandemic forces people to work or attend school from home and limit outside business activities, many segments of our economy face tremendous challenges, which in turn impacts the resources available to operate state and local government. It is within this environment that the 130th Maine legislature was sworn into session earlier this month, and I can confidently state that today's audience is keenly interested in learning more about how the legislature will conduct business and what we should expect for policy initiatives in the coming year. In a moment, we will ask each of our guests to talk briefly about their expectations for the coming legislative session. And the remainder of the program will be a moderated question and answer segment. As a reminder, like other virtual Eggs and Issues programs, we will be taking questions from the audience today. Please use the chat section in YouTube and your question will be conveyed to our presenters. If you have any additional questions following today's program, you are welcome to send them to the chamber at chamber@portlandregion.com. Now, at this time, I would like to introduce our presenters for today's discussion, Speaker Ryan Fecteau and Republican leader Kathleen Dillingham. Good morning to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think Representative Dillingham will hopefully be her video up in a moment. There you are. Good morning.
Morning.
So as I noted earlier, I'm going to give each of you a moment to briefly talk about your expectations for the upcoming legislative session. And we'll start with Speaker Fecteau.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thanks to the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce for the invitation to be with you this morning. I think this is my second Eggs and Issues. I believe I participated in one perhaps 2 years ago before we kicked off the 129th legislature. So it's a pleasure to be with you, of course, in a drastically different format, but nonetheless, happy to be here. As mentioned, my name is Ryan Fecteau. I represent my hometown of Biddeford in the state legislature, and I've served in the legislature for the last 6 years. Since I suspect maybe not everyone knows me, I'll just take a few moments to introduce myself so you get a sense of who I am and where I come from. My grandparents and my dad moved from Quebec in 1964 to Biddeford to work in our textile mills. My grandparents worked in the mills until retirement, and my dad worked in the mills until he saw the writing on the walls that they were likely to close in the near future. My mom dropped out of high school after 9th grade and managed to find her way in healthcare and getting a job despite not having a high school diploma, and raised my sister and I after my parents were divorced. So I grew up in low income housing. We had the physical food stamps that they had back in the day, and really had an experience of where I had to really understand what it was like to not have all the means that other families had, not have a reliable vehicle that got us to and fro, having a mother who was working very long hours for not a great deal of money in a high stress work environment. That really shapes and informs who I am and what the issues I care about. And as we look towards this upcoming session, there have certainly been immense challenges for Maine people and for Maine businesses. And I know that Mainers have a great quality about them, and that is, even despite immense challenges, we not only manage to find our way through, we've managed to find a way to make things better for ourselves. And I look at Biddeford as a great example of this. And the mills closed in the early 2000s here. That was our economic engine. I mean, that not only really important to who we are and how our economy functioned here in Biddeford, but they're right in our downtown. So you can't ignore the fact that we had all of these empty buildings at the center of our downtown, and obviously all the businesses on Main Street that had a symbiotic relationship with the mills, because you had all those employees who would take lunch and go shopping. It was pretty dire. But now Biddeford is the youngest city in the state. Our median age is 35. If you look at the median age of just those who are living in downtown, it's 29. We are a success story about revitalizing a mill district and moving our city forward. And I think that as we look towards what we can accomplish as Maine people, as Maine businesses, as Maine families in the years ahead, we need to look at the opportunities that have been presented to us despite this pandemic. And I think we will. I think that will be on the agenda for this upcoming legislature. And I'm looking forward to getting to work, looking forward to hearing from all of you about your ideas as to how we can move our state and our economy forward, so that we can have brighter days ahead, better, maybe even brighter than the ones that were before the pandemic even started. So thanks for the invitation of being here today, and I look forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Speaker Fecteau. And Leader Dillingham, if you could share with us some initial thoughts, we'd appreciate it.
Certainly. Again, I also thank you for having me on here on the show. It is my first time. So this is exciting for me. For folks that do not know who I am Kathleen Dillingham. I represent Oxford, Otisfield, and Mechanic Falls over here in Western Maine. A little bit about my history that I actually probably don't ever normally talk about. I am the youngest of three. My father is from Oxford and was raised in the area, went into the military when he was younger, and spent a lifetime retired from the Army. One of his duty stations was in Puerto Rico, where he met my mom. So I am the daughter of a Puerto Rican. And my mom had never left the island prior to meeting and falling in love and marrying my dad. So left her family, and they traveled, with his different duty stations. Something that has always impacted me. My mom was a teacher when she was in Puerto Rico and was taught English. And when she came here to Maine, my dad decided he was going to settle the rest of the family here back in Maine. Didn't want to continue to travel us around to different duty stations, something that because of the age gap between my sister, brother and I didn't get to experience a whole lot, but my brother and sister did. And he wanted me to be able to have a more stable education in one school system. But when we came back here to Maine, my mom wasn't able to teach her heavy accent and not recognizing the degree in her teaching experience in Puerto Rico here in the state. So going into, we at one time had a wood mill here over in the area. It was Cornwalls, and that's where my mom started working, so I think we've often talked about looking at people's credentials from outside the state and how they can apply here. And I know we've seen bills about that, and I believe there's probably bills coming forward. I think that's kind of off the topic, but I know that that's something that I've always felt that's something the state, when we're talking about growing the state and building our base for industry here, that's very important. So my viewpoint from over here, I'm in rural Maine. A lot of my upbringing was here, a lot of farming. We used to have manufactured housing here. We've lost those that build manufactured housing. We still have the retail end of it. And our area over here has tried to also remake themselves. We have the casino that came in, was able to provide jobs for folks that that used to work in manufactured housing and lost those jobs. It has attracted some other businesses to the region, and especially focusing on tourists in our area, which on a nice snow day today kind of highlights that. Folks that are going to be traveling through to go to our ski areas north of where I am and over Bridgeton area. So those are focusing on trying to bring some sort of industry and of larger tax base to our area. As far as looking forward to the upcoming session, I look forward to all of us being able to work together. It's very important that we are able to try to put aside the partisan rhetoric and understand that we just by nature of how we view topics, we may come at them differently, but at the end of the day, every single person serving in Augusta wants to make things better for the people in their district and for the people of Maine. I know for my caucus, we certainly, some priorities for us are certainly going to be looking at the budget and what we can do to close the gap, which is right now is projected to be smaller than we first were expecting, but it's still a gap that we need to look at, trying to make some hard decisions on how we're going to close the gap. Everything around, COVID related, and there's so many pieces of legislation that touch on that when you're talking about what people have been suffering through with the pandemic. It's not just the first responders. There's education issues, there's healthcare issues, there's mental health issues. I mean, we could go on and on, all the business issues. It's just it's a very large subject, and it's something that I think is going to take up a large portion of our time, trying to make sure that we touch in on all those areas. And then something that is near and dear to me is reestablishing the co-equal branches of government. And it's not, I want to make clear, it's not about this administration. It's about the executive versus the legislature. So not this legislative body and not this administration, but the two branches. And it is vitally important that the legislature have a voice, and anything that is coming through an emergency order that affects our constituents, because we are the voice of those constituents, those, whether it's a business or individual, whether it's a school system, they need to have an ability to voice their concerns, whether it's in agreement or disagreement. And from my perspective, in my history in Augusta, it only increases the viability of the piece of legislation that we put forward, or a policy that we put forward. The bigger the discussion, the more voices that have an opportunity to weigh in, it makes it, in the end, hopefully a better policy. And right now, from my viewpoint, that's missing. And I think it's important that we reestablish that. So I'm looking forward to, the questions and having the conversation. And certainly, Speaker Fecteau already knows that he and I have had, working together over the past 2 years, not as closely as we have been over the past month. And I enjoy working with him. His door is always open, and he's very open to having meetings with me and listening to what I say. So I hope that, and I have a feeling that will continue over the next 2 years.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Dillingham, Speaker Fecteau. Very much appreciate your initial remarks and the important tone that sets for the coming session. I can say that in my more than 25 years working with the Maine legislature, including my wife serving in the Maine legislature, sometimes the reports of dysfunction are greatly exaggerated, and the bipartisanship that actually does occur on most bills that are processed on a day-to-day basis that may not get a lot of publicity is more the order of the day. So certainly we look forward to that continuing in the weeks and months ahead as we face all of our challenges. So turning to some of the issues that we're likely to face, let me start with more procedural types of questions. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There was an announcement yesterday that cases just hit 551, which is scary. The Augusta Civic Center is where the House and Senate will meet. How do you see the process moving forward with COVID-19? Are we going to slow things down at the outset and pick up pace later in the year? Are we going to hit the ground running in January? How do you see things going?
Well, we've always started a little bit slower in the first session in terms of committee work, because the committees for the month of January, they're doing orientation. So getting a sense of their clerk, their analysts. We have a lot of new members in the House this session. I think 23 in our caucus. Representative Dillingham can speak to the numbers in her caucus, I think in the high teens for sure. So, collectively, the new members represent a large percentage of the House. And so it's important, obviously, for them to get an understanding of how the process works and who they can go to for committee amendments and what the role of the analyst is, and so on and so forth. So, I think, just as has been the case in the past, there's that slow ramping up of the committee work, which I anticipate in January the committees will spend that time in the first few weeks at least getting their feet under them, and then bills I think will start to be referred. The bills will mostly be referred by the clerk and the Secretary of the Senate without us having to move them on the floor. Obviously, if you've paid attention to the legislature in the past, we spend a lot of time in the first several months convening the legislature just for the purpose of moving bills to committee. And we'll be able to avoid that for the most part. For bills that have larger questions, the clerk and the secretary will set aside for the days that we do come in. We did establish a new process. So if a bill gets sent to a committee and the committee chairs and leads decide, this bill doesn't belong here. In the past, they would have had to hold a public hearing, even though they knew the bill didn't belong in their committee, and then they'd have to have a work session to move it to a different committee. Under these established rules that we passed on swearing-in day, the chairs and leads can work it out and send it back up to the House or Senate so that the bill can be re-referred to a different committee. So slightly different, but I think the process will be, I don't think any slower. I think it will definitely be moving at a similar clip as it would have otherwise. And Representative Dillingham probably can weigh in as well.
Thank you.
I would agree, except I actually think maybe we're going to be able to work getting bills to committees faster. And where our committees will be meeting remotely, we also passed rules that allow actually the members to vote remotely, so they're participating remotely should they choose to. They have the ability to sit in the committee room and Zoom in from the committee room, but then vote that way rather than in past they would have had to call the speaker's office, and that would have really slowed some things down with all of our members always having to call their votes in to Speaker Fecteau to make sure, yes, I've got the vote and it's approved. So I think procedurally that way we'll be able to move things faster. The remote participation, I think, may help maybe move some pieces of legislation through committee, the process a little faster. The thing that we've, as far as the Speaker and the Senate President, myself and Leader Timberlake have been discussing is the importance of the ability for the voice of the public and for those advocating on behalf or against pieces of legislation, and knowing that we're not in a situation where we're going to be able to allow them to physically be in the building in a committee room to testify for or against a piece of legislation. Coming up with every possible alternative that we could put forth to ensure that their voice is heard. And, the Speaker and the Senate President certainly have been very proactive in working with myself and Senator Timberlake on that issue. And we all recognize that it is of the utmost importance that that we don't insulate ourselves as a legislature against or from, the voice of the people and the people that we represent. There's still things that we're trying to work out, but I think we've come a long way from even just 2 weeks ago of what that's going to look like and how we're going to make that work.
Great, thank you. And maybe picking up on that point, certainly meetings like today, I've had the opportunity to participate in many remote city and town council meetings, state agency meetings over Zoom and other platforms. And each time it's slightly different. There are some meetings where members raise a virtual hand and then they're called on and they appear by video in front of the group. There are others where they appear only by audio. It works differently. Are you able to provide any sneak previews to our audience about what public participation in a committee hearing might look like in 2021?
Yeah, so there will be there will be several means available. So obviously participating in the Zoom with video and audio will be one way, or a member of the public could just have audio on, I believe. I don't think they, because they can also call in. So there's going to be, there'll be a number of 1-800 numbers that will be connected to the various committees, and folks can call in if they don't have access to internet or reliable internet connection. So those are two means. Obviously, as has been the case in the past, emailing in your testimony, mailing in testimony, those two items remain available to folks. We're looking into having a number that folks can call if they need help trying to navigate how to access the process, and having someone designated to field phone calls. And then to Representative Dillingham's point, it's going to be different, and making sure that the public knows how they can access the public hearing process, especially, but just the lawmaking process in general, is going to be really important. And so organizations like the Chamber and your partners and your members, helping us spread the word to the public about how they can participate. We really would appreciate any help that we can get, because it's going to be different, and we want to make sure that the word is spread about how people can engage the public hearing process, because that's the most important part of the process. It makes a huge difference, and you know, we're lucky in Maine that every bill gets a public hearing, and that there's not a limit on how many people can speak on a bill. You don't sign up and someone gets to cherry pick who's before a committee. I mean, you look at what other states do, and a lot of states, you know, the speaker or the president of the Senate, or whatever terms they use to describe their presiding officers, they can shove bills in a desk and never see the light of day. So I think we're very lucky in Maine that I think our process is a lot more open, and it gives a fair shot to I think both bills presented by the minority party and bills presented by the majority party to get a fair shake, get their day in court, if you will. And I think that's really important. I'm sure Representative Dillingham can add on to that.
I think you actually covered it very well. I think the only thing that I know that we've had the discussion about for those that are choosing to email or have a mail in their testimony, that we understand that sometimes that actually speaking before a committee might be more impactful than having something that is either handed out to the committee members or emailed to the committee members, and it doesn't actually get read, or not everyone gets to hear what is said in that testimony. From my experience on my committee, it was always referenced that we have this testimony, maybe say from Jim Cohen, but we actually didn't ever hear what the testimony was. Publicly, as members, we read it. And we've talked about the ability for, if there is someone in that instance that is emailing or mailing something in, they have the ability to ask a committee member to read their testimony out loud. So it's like it's read into the record. And I know that, I think that was something might be further conversation, but I think we were all agreeing that that's a possibility as well.
That's great, thank you. And certainly great strides have been made over the last number of years in terms of the electronic type of access. So obviously this spurs us to have even more improvements to that process. So very helpful, appreciate it. Tomorrow is the cloture date by which all legislators have to submit bills, and to some degree that defines how large the legislative agenda is going to be. Often we've seen 1,600 or 1,700 bills brought forward in any given session. Any predictions as to what we'll see this year? Is there an over/under on that amount?
Well, I feel like I'd be cheating, because I did catch word yesterday that there were half the number of bills that were submitted in the first session of the 129th, but I suspect we could quickly double that number by Friday. So I'm not optimistic that we'll have fewer bills than the 129th, but that's my dream. If I could have it, I would definitely like to come under the number from the 129th, but we'll see. Hopefully half is as of Wednesday is a good sign of things to come on Friday.
Now I'm worried that anybody, any members that are watching or listening are like, oh, there's only half in. There's plenty of room for my bill. So, but it's one of those things that I think there's always the caution that's put out there to try to limit legislation, but in all practicality, when you think about it, and it's how do you pick and choose? And if a member feels that this is something that's vitally important to them or to their district, they've been elected to do so. And so I think where we try to hopefully cut down on maybe some of the redundancy is when we have duplicate bills, But even that raises concerns. I think, Jim, that you certainly know from your time in Augusta, that even then the battle is, well, why is it this sponsor and I'm a co-sponsor, and why wasn't it my bill? And so it's certainly one of those can of worms that once it's opened, you just kind of have to deal with it, and we'll make our way through. And the committee certainly have the ability to kind of group like-minded bills together on one day, so that you don't hopefully have a lot of duplicate testimony at the same length. So maybe, those advocating for or against can stand up and just say, I reiterate my stance from, LD1, and I apply it to LD10 as well. And that would hopefully help move some things more quickly.
Great, thank you. So I think we'll probably move to more of the substantive issues that the legislature will be facing in the coming weeks and months. But there's one question that's come forward from the chat related to the Economic Recovery Committee that met over the summer and into the fall. And there were a wide range of recommendations from that committee, including some recommendations on various bond issues that should be issued. I don't know whether either of you have thoughts or observations about some of those recommendations and some of those issues that we might see in 2021 in front of the legislature.
One of the highlights in that report for me personally was the recommendation concerning housing. Believe the ERC recommended a $50 million investment in affordable housing. And I think that remains a really important issue for the state. And it's not just an urban issue; it's a rural issue as well. We have to make sure that folks have the ability to afford a place to live in the state. And it ties into everything else that is really important. We talk about the workforce and developing a workforce for the future in various industries. We need to make sure that when we're trying to attract people to live here, people trying to make sure people stay here, having an affordable home is really foundational to everything else that I think we have deemed collectively, regardless of party, that is important. And so I was pleased to see that the ERC had taken a focus on housing. I suspect it will be a pretty big conversation this session and probably next session as well. I have a couple bills related to housing, and so we'll see how things go. But I think that's was a really important recommendation from the commission.
Great, thank you.
I think it's also important. I mean, the highlighting, and as Speaker Fecteau mentioned, about workforce and what we're going to be able to do to attract that to the state, and actually even just to keep what we have, and rather having them leave the state for better conditions. So I haven't looked through the bill titles to see what's actually being submitted around that, but certainly interested in those discussions and what's going to come forth. I know broadband definitely is going to be a huge discussion, and I think the past several months have made it very clear how important it is, not just for functioning now and what we have to do here in the state, but going forward. And we've had that, even had the discussion about the way the legislature works, and that we've kind of been forced to step into this technological age that and the building maybe didn't allow for, and certainly leadership recognizing that it is time that we look to see how we make the investment. Not just to move the legislature forward, but to move our state forward. And it's a benefit on every level, for businesses, for schools, for individuals. It's just, it touches on everything. And this has laid it very clear, very bare that it's important. And we have to certainly have a bipartisan discussion about how we're going to make that happen and move it forward.
Well, I'll date myself by this comment, but when I first started working in the legislature, there was a very important bank of payphones that everyone had to work with to communicate to the outside world. And a big technological improvement was the introduction of a fax machine that was available for everyone. So we've certainly come a long way, but obviously there's more to go. But since the subject of
Just jump in real quick, just I'll date myself as well, because I can remember working in the office and lobbyists sending in their faxes, and all of a sudden the fax machine would go off, and there's some lobbyist platform or piece of paperwork that just shoots in on the fax machine. It's like, okay, where is this coming from? But I'll date myself along with you.
Well, in the year 2020, a member sent in their committee preferences through fax to our office, so it's not a lost technology quite yet.
That's great. So obviously broadband, since that subject has come up, there was a bond issue this past year for $15 million. There have been recommendations for larger bond issues. Some of the solution is money. I heard folks from the Connect Me Authority the other day talking about how state bond money can help leverage private investment. But combined between private investment and public investment, that's a component of what's needed. How do you see the Maine legislature addressing the issue of broadband and making sure that connectivity exists for all the things that we have needed it for and now need it for because of the pandemic?
I'll go ahead and weigh in first. I know it's a discussion that it started with the administration and certainly interested parties last term, and certainly recognizing the importance of wanting to make sure that there's access. I know that there was discussion about now I'm blanking. I apologize. More so than just broadband. It was a bigger discussion about should we be looking forward to what maybe future technologies are, so that by the time you make the cost investment and you establish the the framework and the network you need for the broadband, are we then going to be outdated? So I know that was part of the conversation of looking at making sure that we're forward thinking in our application, but also talking about end user use. So not maybe overlaying a lot of sorry, Portland was one of the areas that we talked about, but not overlaying a lot of infrastructure there that's already existing, but making sure that it gets out to places like in out in Eastern Maine, or from here in my district. I can travel into Otisfield. It's about, takes me maybe 15 minutes to get there, and I have no service. Those sorts of things. And those folks still have to do, they have to have satellite service to put satellites to try and get service for themselves over there. So it's a larger discussion. It's very easy to say that we need to invest in broadband. It's how are we best going to invest in broadband, and how is it best going to serve the people of Maine. And part of that private buy-in is also looking to municipal buy-in from municipalities, and how is that going to maybe help them, and what maybe their comprehensive plan is for their area. So I look forward to continuing those discussions and hoping that we can come to some sort of agreement on not just there is money that's needed, but exactly what is the plan for the money and how we're going to make that investment.
Great, thank you.
And the only thing I would add is on the municipal point, I had the chance to go up to Calais over the fall to meet up with my colleague, Representative Ann Perry, and she was touting the work that they've done in Calais and Baileyville, and now I think Alexander is joining their network as well. It's a municipal-owned fiber optic network that they've initiated on their own as municipalities and have implemented. And I think Representative Perry in Calais, on the border with Canada, is getting probably better internet, but has a better internet connection than I do here in Southern Maine and Biddeford. So, that I think what they've done in Baileyville and Calais is a great example of perhaps something we can replicate throughout the state. And I think just finding ways to spread the word as to what they've done, but also make sure that municipalities have the resources to initiate something like they've done in Baileyville and Calais. I think really impressive project, and a good example of a municipality not waiting around for state leaders to solve the problem for them.
Related note, and we can drive around the state, and sometimes we have good cell phone service, and sometimes that's really the only solution that exists. And I certainly hear from members of the community, and even where I live in Portland, the cell phone service can be spotty. But the decision to put in a tower or some other facility is ultimately a local decision. And at the same time, people complain that their service isn't good. Then there's a line of people opposing the cell tower that's being constructed. How do you see that conversation?
Those are tough conversations. I mean, that's always the challenging thing with the development of any kind, really. People want to see improvements, but when it comes to actually getting it done, if it's in their backyard, it becomes a lot more of a challenge. I know this is an ongoing issue. For example, I ran a business in Ogunquit, and the cell service down there is absolutely horrific. And there's not a nearby cell tower. And yeah, I mean, I always, it wasn't so much about me when I'm down there, but I'm thinking about all the tourists who come to visit our communities, and they can't get a cell signal, and the impression that leaves upon them. When we're talking about rebuilding our economy, attracting people to our state, applying the impression that people can't get cell service is not one that you want to leave people with. I think that's just a basic thing that people expect in today's world. And I think one thing that we need to think about is the fact that if we're trying to attract people to live, work, and play here in Maine, we need to make sure that we are providing the right impression, and that's a very important first impression for folks.
And I would agree that, that's certainly we always run into the not in my backyard issue, and I think it takes education and a little bit. So this is just, it's out of my certainly out of anything that I have experience with, but I've just always wondered why the industry couldn't actually make their cell towers look a little better. For maybe some places, maybe, they're big, they're unwieldy, but maybe making them look maybe more sculptural would help. Because I think part of the issue in that conversation, a lot of pushback, is that it's an eyesore, especially if you're in a tourist area, that's really not what you want people to see. So I don't know how you get around the issue unless the technology just advances so that, the tower itself isn't, so unsightly to look at. And again, that's way out of anything that I have experience with of what the size, the height, and exactly what materials and everything need to be for it to be to function. So, but I've always wondered. I'd love to have that conversation with somebody in the industry that they could explain to me and tell me like, oh well, maybe it wouldn't work. But again, technology is always changing, and who knows, someday, we'll be looking at like, yeah, we don't need those anymore because there's some other sort of format and technology that works to be able to allow for, broader service without a cell tower.
In Biddeford, we just purchased our trash burning facility downtown, kept the stack that they incinerated the trash in, and thus kept the cell phone signal on the top of the stack, but it probably needs to be painted or something. It's not necessarily the most wonderful thing you've ever seen, but at least there isn't trash being burned anymore. So
that's great. No, thank you both. Another, maybe switching gears a little bit, but still within the theme of functioning remotely. We've talked about the legislature and its need to function remotely, and certainly certainly local governments have been functioning remotely during the pandemic. Do you see an effort to maybe stick with some of the changes that have been implemented to allow for city councils and water districts and county commissions and others that are currently functioning remotely once the pandemic ends, that maybe some of those changes might stay in place? Do you see that as a conversation likely to occur during this legislative session?
I actually have a bill in to continue that. And that actually came from one of my municipalities requesting the ability that remote participation be put in statute so that they have the ability to continue that going forward. I'm sure there's others that probably have, same thought, same duplicate bills, but I know I did put one in to address that. I think it's important. Mine allows a municipality to choose. It doesn't mandate it. So that for any municipality that chooses to continue to allow the remote access and remote participation can do so. And I agree. I think it's important. And I know for my communities here, my municipalities, that they all have seen a marked increase in interest in what they're doing by allowing that remote access. Not everyone always has the ability to make it, on a Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock to go and sit in a room to watch a meeting or participate in it with everything else that they have going on in their lives, especially, at a time when, if we get back to, kids and their sports schedules and after school activities and maybe other meetings or other, civic organizations that people are involved with. I think that, again, this goes to the greater discussion that we need to step forward. We need to step forward into, a technological age that's been existing, and we've just been resistant, I think, as a whole, and certainly more so in parts of our state than others. And we've just kind of been forced and dragged into it because of the pandemic. And it has certainly shown, I think, our weaknesses and places where we can improve. And in doing so, it's been very beneficial. And I, for one, certainly hope that I can gain bipartisan support to make sure that we reestablish that into statute and allow municipalities the ability to do so.
Great, thank you.
I don't have much to add other than the fact that in the 6 years I've served in the legislature, this has been a topic of conversation, and not until the pandemic existed that were we able to quickly make changes as to how to allowing that to happen. I mean, in the past, there was immense resistance to allowing not only municipalities, but even some boards and commissions and other similar entities to sort of allow for remote participation. So it's interesting to see how again, what I mentioned up front, although times have been very difficult for our communities and our businesses and our families, there are opportunities that have presented themselves to us as a result of this pandemic. And I think this one is a very clear one. And I think we should take the opportunity to not move backwards into this past where we just, are resistant to change and adopting technology and embracing it. So.
Great, thank you. So we're starting to bump up in the hour. We may have time for 2 quick questions before we wrap up, but maybe let's move. We've talked about how to participate while staying put, but there's still a need for us to move around the state, drive over our roads and bridges, and obviously at the same time, a lot of driving around as we talk about clean energy and the Climate Council's recommendations about how do we address climate change, that moving to a more electrified transportation or transit sector becomes important. I guess, do you anticipate that the issue of electrification of the transit sector, investments in that, affordability of electricity, do you see those issues being major topics of conversation this session?
I would say yes. Yeah, definitely. You know, I think we're beginning to see a shift nationwide in this conversation. I think beginning with the manufacturers, it seems like, especially, you know, our American-made vehicles and manufacturers are really trying to spearhead this, because I think that they see an opportunity to be on the front of this issue, and I think it's obviously good for the American economy for those manufacturers to be leading on the electric vehicles and getting them out to American people, and making sure that that they're affordable. I mean, that's obviously the key here, is making sure that there's a landing point in which, you know, buying an electric vehicle makes sense for one's family. I think to date, it's been a little bit out of reach for many families.
Great, thanks.
I look again. I looking at the time. It's certainly a much bigger conversation. I agree with what Speaker Fecteau says. That, you know, I look forward to the conversation. I absolutely do believe this is going to be one of the bigger topics that we'll be dealing with. And I mean, it has so many aspects of around the conversation. But I think at the end of the day, just talking about manufacturing, whether, you know, any sort of production, any owner there, whether it's a farmer, business owner, or whatever, they of course always want to do what they can to keep the cost of production down, and clean production. You know, it's for the viability of whatever it is that they're producing, and the cost at the end cost. So the lower the cost of production, then the ability to actually have a lower end cost. And I think that, you know, that's just, you know, it's just, you know, economics of how you're going to make that happen. But I think that at the same time, certainly folks understand the need to address our environment. And again, I come from, you know, rural Maine with, you know, a lot of farming, and I will always say there isn't ever a better conservationist than a farmer. It's inherent to what they do. It's a necessity. The same thing could go for anybody working in the forest industry. You know, it's inherent to the nature of their business. So.
Great, thank you. Last question also that came from our chat, and this may have a very quick answer. Typically, this is the long session. The even years are the short session, but this year is a session in the middle of a pandemic. The question is there any possibility that essentially the short session becomes the long session, and the long session becomes the short session, to allow for issues to be addressed when people have more time?
I would say I don't think so.
I would say our long session, my thought today here in December is that our long session will be a even longer session. That's my bet on it.
So we've got the wicked long session coming up, and then we'll see about 2022. Well, I want to thank both Speaker Fecteau, Leader Dillingham, for joining us here this morning. I think we've had about nearly 450 people sign up, and hundreds of people tuning in this morning. We appreciate the opportunity to hear what's happening in Augusta, what's likely to happen in 2021. Thank you both for your service, for helping to keep us moving. Thank you in advance for helping to keep us moving in 2021 as we tackle a lot of challenging issues. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas. It's Leader Dillingham brought the holiday spirit to this conversation this morning, so really appreciate that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. This has been a pleasure. Again, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to everyone. And certainly for any of your listeners, participants, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me in my office. Always happy to have continued discussions and answer anything that I certainly can try to answer.
Great. Thank you so much. So as we conclude today's program, as always, you can view a complete list of the Chamber's upcoming events on the Chamber's website, and we encourage you to subscribe to the Chamber's newsletter and be sure to follow the Chamber across all social media platforms. We look forward to seeing you next month at January's Eggs and Issues, when we will hear from a panel of leaders from the Rue Institute, which is the dynamic new institution of higher education located here in Portland and affiliated with Northeastern University. In the meantime, please be safe, have a wonderful holiday season, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.